Well,
This is Interlocutor.
Investigator. And,
We are sitting on a red bench. There is an assortment of other benches around this one that vary in color. Orange, gray, yellow, black, white. We are sitting on a red bench though, a color that complements your pale skin and black denim jeans.
a shiny red bench. 2 pairs of black denim jeans, pale skin, gray jackets and shirts, leather dress shoes, striped socks, and a cashmere hat.
We are having a conversation about benches.
We're also having a conversation about colors and forms, the rudimentary elements of an environment that substantiate certain kinds of dispositions.
We are having a conversation about conversations.
We're having a conversation about the intersections that occur between bodies in the built environment.
We are participating in culture. We are participating in colors, textures, languages, narratives, and systems.
I used to live by a shopping mall. There were benches, chairs, colors, textures, and narratives in this environment as well. I had conversations with people in this mall. Some of those conversations were about the objects, colors, smells, and constituencies that elaborated the ways in which I was participating in culture.
White walls, neutral and austere. Cement floors, coated in a glossy resin. Industrial bohemian bourgeois proletariat. There are benches. There are refractions of the floor and walls. They bespeak of a time that has passed us. They tell us a story, a narrative we can see but not feel. Corbusier, the Garden City, Fourier's industrial utopianism, the idealities of an early modern revolutionary avant-garde.
Tile floors laid out in an elegant pattern. Benches and chairs that alternate in color but are coherent in design. Black marble tabletops that complement the ethnically diverse assortment of foods, objects, and peoples. Signs, yes, so many signs, each one emanating its own texture, lifestyle, and narrative.
I haven't been to a shopping mall in a long time, D. I suppose that I don't have much interest in the prescriptions placed upon cultural participation in these environments. The shopping mall, now that I think about it, seems to be an antiquated model of cultural participation. The mall regulates our access to information and imposes specified methods of consumption, visuality, sociality, and exchange that are articulated through the confines of the built environment. The internet has simply surpassed this centralized physical domain. I think of the shopping mall and other public spaces like it as protruding masses that shape publics within molds that bespeak of uniformity, that align the participant within a codified and fixated role, that impedes the possibility for real political gestures. The internet's architecture, on the other hand, takes shape as I act upon it. It molds under the auspices of how I'd like to participate in culture. D begins to walk around the gallery.
I think you're right, C. The shopping mall, along with many other physical environments, seem to be forms and methods of cultural participation that are quickly becoming obsolete. The internet is a hyper-interactive interface, in appearance, a truly democratic system of participation. I question whether or not these platforms truly negate the prescriptions and hierarchically inclined systems of representation, sociality, visuality, etc. that is placed upon activity in other places, public spaces there. When I reflect upon the situations and experiences I've had on social media sites like Facebook, I often begin to radically question whether the popular idealities many associate with concerning these supposedly democratic platforms is authentic or not. C lays down on the bench.
We are having a conversation at a gallery. We've been sitting on a red bench. A bench that was produced by the artist Liam Gillick, which he assigned the title, Discussion Bench, Platform Red. We are participating in culture, and we are also participating in the words that the artist has assigned to the benches in the hopes of explicating their usages. In a way, I suppose we are substantiating the meaning of the empty signifiers the artist has erected to explicate and codify the meaning of the forms, colors, and textures we've been involved with during our discussion in this environment. We are entangled within a specified zone of communication, sociality, and exchange. We are face to face with a deficient elaboration of publicness, a public sphere of the distant past. A certain nostalgia emanates from these benches. They exert a poignant allure, commensurable with the spectator's relation to an artifact enframed within a vitrine.
Seth Price is looking at a print on the wall and overhears the conversation between A and B. Excuse me. I've overheard a bit of your conversation and agree with what you just said. Publicness today has as much to do with sites of production and reproduction as it does with any supposed physical commons. A popular album could be regarded as a more successful instance of public art than a monument tucked away in an urban plaza.
I have very specific convictions concerning how I'd like to participate in culture, Seth and C. I seek a malleable public arena, a theater, a space in which I can inhabit settings and appropriate dispositions, lexicons, and methods of exchange, as though they were props that lied at my disposal. I seek an active and sporadic form of governance, a space that would consider criticality as more than an act of negation, a processual criticality, a criticality that elaborates worlds, a criticality in which productive tensions between a new articulation of critique and the attempt to arrive at a new notion of governance occur. A multivalent and transversal conception of a public sphere in which new and diverging notions of sociality, exchange, participation, and visuality are continuously formed, deterritorialized, and reconstituted. I used to go to malls. I used to have experiences with people, places, and things that were singular, referential, and haptic. I used to feel the presence of institutions, plazas, and states as protruding masses, tangible entities that had this abrasive authority. I felt them on my skin and in my words. These experiences are fading from my memory, though, and I feel the advent of digital culture, the subsequent dematerialization of labor, and the collapse of physical public domains will substantiate the complete erasure of these spaces, experiences, and memories. The gallery, these benches, our discussion, these are the moments when the very notion of what it means to participate in culture can be radically thrown back into questioning. I'm interested in publics before publicness. I'm interested in the poetics of physical space and the voids that inherently form when we associate with its imposing structures. The internet, just as mass distribution networks as the public spheres of the 21st century, put the poetics of the public gesture and the anomalies that are inherent to interhuman exchange at the risk of being identified, categorized, and made into information before they even have the chance to simply be.
D, I think you're waist deep in quicksand right now. Digital media is more than simply a channel for conveying information between two or more environments. It's an environment in and of itself. Sites of production and exchange do more than simply transubstantiate experiences into quantifiable forms of information. They're experiences in themselves. These sites elaborate new narratives, narratives the user or producer has full agency over. We're entering an open source culture, a culture that is radically challenging secular notions of authorship and identity. Your somewhat Adornian critique of mass culture has simply become irrelevant at this point. Media, such as social networking sites, do not isolate and pacify the viewer, but actually provoke them to engage in culture as an active and embodied political subject. It's the neoliberalist representative politics this show exemplifies. That is the problem right now. This is the spectacle. This is the type of public sphere that turns sociality into a generic repository of signs. What I see here is what I see in contemporary politics, the illusion of a truly democratic space of association and governance. I don't think you've quite realized it yet, but what I really think you're advocating for is a digitalized public commons.
I'm not, though. I truly believe that the built environment serves as a pivotal facet for the formation of a strong public sphere. Liam Gillick's exhibition gestures at the possibility of reconsidering what the function of a gallery can be. His work deterritorializes the viewer's common conceptions of what it means to participate in a public. Gillick's work opens up a space where we can ask ourselves the question of how we want to participate in culture. The benches pierce through the linguistic barriers that dichotomize politics and aesthetics, seeing and speaking, reading and writing, and in doing so delimitate the prescriptions that fictitiously compartmentalize various fields of understanding. The gallery, on the other hand, is what Rancière would call the police order, the order that distributes the sensible and delimitates what is doable and undoable, visible and invisible. The order erected in the gallery and corporate museum are what I think stultifies the political subject. It's not simply the artwork, it is also the process, infrastructures, and discursive spheres that institutions are involved within when conveying it to a public.
I agree with you to a certain extent, D, but that's exactly why I think the cybernetic network, as public sphere, is such an ideal domain for the contemporary political subject. The internet thwarts the logic of these representative orders as it offers the cultural participant freedom from the linguistic and aesthetic barriers that compartmentalize life into centralized vocations of understanding. Everyone becomes a cultural producer in the open source community, just as everyone is handed a crown, that is, the right of self-governance.
As I mentioned earlier, though, do you really think that the digital commons truly eludes the regulatory apparatuses we've been talking about that have such an explicit presence in the gallery, museum, and institutional environment? I tend to agree with Nicolas Bourriaud's affirmation concerning the nature of the digitalized public sphere.
Nicolas Bourriaud is sitting on an adjacent bench sending out emails on his BlackBerry when he overhears D say his name.
Exactly. We must question the popular ideologies that surround the internet. I think the society of the spectacle is followed by the society of extras, where everyone finds the illusion of an interactive democracy in more or less truncated channels of communication.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying, Bourriaud. Does digital media emancipate the spectator or place them in a cybernetic solitude? Is the social media platform the next public sphere, or is it nothing more than a corporately regulated digital shopping mall? Whatever it might be, I believe the collapse of a physical public commons will unavoidably lead to an unchecked proliferation of hierarchies and new and ever more abrasive forms of domination and exploitation. We need to defend the autonomy of the civic sector and the institutions that reside within it.
We are having a conversation about the public sphere.
We're having a conversation about a script.
We are a script. We are letters and we are performers. We've been assigned certain roles within a narrative, and these roles constitute diverging perspectives on an issue. The question of debate: shall we flee from or defend the public spheres of our contemporary societies?
The setting: a gallery in New York City where an artist has decided to place benches that constitute through both form and title a conception of what publicness is or perhaps should be.
My name is Flee, and your name is Defend.
Flee. The institution of art is arcane, just as the bureaucracies are that attempt to govern our civic sectors. Information technology is an abundant resource and provides the cultural participant the opportunity to rewrite the rudimentary scores that construe the form a public takes. The scores which substantiate certain aspects of the political subject's performance on the public stage. Capitalist exploitation, the rise of inter-servile effective labor conditions, the collapse of the nation-state, and rise of the neoliberalist global monetarism all insinuate the necessity for the complete negation of the dilapidated cornerstones that are currently holding together our civic sectors. Virno, in a text he wrote recently called The Grammar of the Multitude, articulates two strategies for fleeing from the conditions the contemporary public spheres we're currently entangled within. The first is what he calls radical disobedience, a disobedience that does not limit itself to the transgression of laws, but rather actually calls into question the very foundation of their validity through constitutional actions. The second, and in a way the precursor to the first, is defection.
Verno mysteriously appears behind Flea and taps on his shoulder. Defection, my good friend, Flea, modifies the conditions within which the struggle takes place. Rather than presupposing those conditions to be an unalterable horizon, it modifies the context within which a problem has arisen. rather than facing this problem by opting for one or the other of the provided alternatives. In short, exit, defection, consists of unrestrained invention, which alters the rules of the game and throws the adversary completely off balance.
Thank you, Werner. You obviously articulated your position better than I could have. It's been quite the day, hasn't it, Defend? Running into all these great minds that have been so relevant to our conversation. I guess this artist did succeed in drawing together an interesting community of spectators. But yes, to defect rather than defend. To build anew rather than restore a sinking ship. This is the way, and information technologies are the wood and nails of the project.
I am interested in the middle. That is, the border zone between our current dilemma, which I'll call the inside, and your more ideal future, the outside. For a border zone thwarts the structuralizing institutional parameters of the current public sphere as it establishes a contested middle region in which new prescriptions and new methods of instituting perpetually reestablish the orders which regulate activity. By contesting the demarcations between the singular outside and the plural inside, this model of governance facilitates what Eric Rogoff would call an institutional potentiality, a rhizomatic organizational strategy that departs from the top-down organizational prerogatives of the traditional museum and ventures into an open arena of the potential, of the predictive and the possible rather than the prescriptive and the plans. Unlike the public spheres, which are often only semi-public spheres, of the mainstream museum and institution, which in many cases have been reduced to nothing more than brands of corporate entities that codify activity within rigidly sanctioned lexicons or languages of consumption that are spectacleized and voyeuristic. The institutional models I'm interested in pursuing offer the cultural participant a space in which politics and revolutionary social processes can be more than merely voiced, but actually lived. The advent of new institutionalism in the early 90s that took place primarily in Western Europe in accordance with the formation of a new paradigm in curatorial practice is a good example of how the civic sector is defended through the strategies I've been telling you about, Flu.
Maria Lind and Alex Fargo Harrison are in the middle of a heated discussion. They're sitting on discussion bench platform yellow. And Maria just finished telling Alex about her involvement at Kunstverein München. Their celebrity status as distinguished Euro curators of the new institutionalism Defend was just discussing has drawn a small crowd who are intently observing. Let's listen in and meditate upon what they are talking about.
I think the project and your description of it raises a number of important issues. For one, it exemplifies the self-reflectivity of new institutionalism, the way it examines histories, contexts, and methods self-consciously and critically. Another, of course, is the wider question of how new institutions conceive of their audiences, their publics, and how they go about relating to them in contrast to more mainstream institutional practices.
This is one of the big issues that remains to be discussed properly on a larger scale in the art world. At the moment, this discourse is rather lame and simplistic in terms of what it means to work with people, to reach out to an audience, to create new publics. It would probably be more productive if we think about what the institution does as catering public or semi-public spheres, which sometimes it is the one and sometimes it is the other, and what can happen within these public and semi-public spheres, including games, conflicts, and collaborations, how they can relate to the traditional public spheres. Most likely that involves working closely in relation to certain groups of people, but also to take into consideration not only audience figures and new visitors, getting people other than the existing believers across the threshold. This is again about continuity. How do you make people come back and want to participate? How do you create an ongoing discussion within an institution? It's important to start from the artwork and the artists themselves. I think it would not be very difficult to do that consciously in terms of what artists are doing today. By having particular interest groups and a number of works that are more organically connected, you'd avoid this blind dating, forced marriage method that I think is employed too often. However, I should say many public institutions do a good job. but they often don't mediate what they do in terms of these things. That is not what gets on top of the agenda on the information board at Tate Modern or Moderna Museet in Stockholm. Another way of dealing with this is that you would get involved with a particular group through a particular art project, and that art project would not necessarily be selected, or the artist would not be invited in order to reach that group, but the group can be an effect of this work. You see what I mean?
So in advance of inviting the artist, you would not know which group it would lead to.
Exactly. Of course, you have an idea of the spectrum of interests of an artist, but at the same time, I think it is a conscious move away from picking out the specific group and saying this is a needy group. They need more art. Starting from the artist and the logic of the work, and then moving to a particular profession, area, age group, or whatever it may be, is more respectful. One example is what we did in Munich with one of our Sputniks, Ruth Kazerer from Vienna, who wanted to initiate a project with young women focusing on representations of women in public spaces in Munich. In the end, there were 5 or 6, and they collaborated over a period of a little more than 6 months. Meeting regularly and using the Kunstverein as their meeting place, doing field studies, and eventually producing a sort of television program. A video which was never broadcast, but the setup was like a talk show on these topics. And we absolutely did not ask Ruth to do something with teenage girls. It was her idea, and of course it attracted some attention from that peer group and also people working with such groups.
I think one of the hardest things to consider in terms of new institutionalism is its relation to its social context. We talked about how a lot of these institutions have been clustered in the former social democracies of Europe. But what does this type of practice mean in Lithuania? Or could it be possible in Beijing? What does it mean in places that don't have an institutional history? And related to that, what is the relationship between developments in the institutions we've been discussing and new biennials? Biennials are becoming increasingly institutionalized, in this sense that they are gathering an institutional history, and with that, certain curatorial habits and reoccurring thematic concerns. Yet critical reflection on its institutional characteristics, of the kind we see practiced in new institutions, is often lacking. Documenta X was a possible exception. The biennial phenomenon follows the logic of globalization, opening up new territories to the art world. In contrast, new institutionalism often arises in critical response to a sedimentation of institutional history. They are contemporaneous, but rarely discussed together.
And of course there are the art fairs. Their ambition to be platforms for discursive activity has intensified. They are now more like an institution than more classical institutions. I'm waiting for the smart art fair which decides to set up a fund to fund precisely this type of experimental program from its profits.
Haha.
It could be an existing one or it could be a new one, but it seems that the ultimate credibility would be for them unselfishly support. No, but my point is, but it seems that the ultimate credibility would be for them to unselfishly support something very, very different, something impossible to sell.
Some subversive financing. This might lead us, in more general terms, to the institution's political role. Charles Escher discusses the art institution in optimistic, if not utopian terms, as a forum of possibility. He sees the institution as a radically democratic space for free-form discussion and how things could be otherwise. In Escher's view, art is uniquely transdisciplinary. This, combined with his view that there is no institutional outside, means the art institution is a uniquely privileged site for imagining the world differently. That is, a world not subject to the laws of global capitalism.
It's a beautiful vision.
Yes, it is. But of course it remains a vision until the institution is actually used that way. If you're talking about a radically democratic forum, then at some point it has to be defined by its public, as well as its director. Escher has, by the way, argued for retaining the Auditorium Museum model, but at the service of radical political progressiveness. Chantal Mouffe. Is there a kind of inevitable gulf between an aspiration like this and the reality of how the institution is or isn't used? Or do you believe that's precisely the point? That it is about the role a vision of a possible future might play in the present?
Well, utopias are only interesting if there is something palpable about them. One of the main obstacles here is to do with the requirements of the funders. Art, cultural life, civil society would benefit from funders being more generous in terms of allowing recipients of money to have more of a lead in terms of how to use that money, in order to try what Charles Escher proposes. Research institutes receive money to do research. Why not do the same thing with a certain number of art institutions? It's not necessarily about transforming the whole system, but providing stability and enough space for maneuvering to do radical things. At the end of the day, it is about self-determination.
It is realistic to believe a new institution could function as a radical democracy? Question. For it to be a radical democracy, it would really have to be full of people with competing interests and be used in an incredibly active way. I've yet to see that happening.
Back to flee and demand.
Defend.
Defend. Flee and defend. There is no outside of governance, but there are many ways we can govern. New institutionalism for me can be no more than a weak searcher that conceals a very, 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 very deep wound. I'm concerned that these self-reflexive spaces that emanate the revolutionary callings of a neo-avant-garde are being used as a smokescreen to cover up the broader crises that are currently taking place in the civic sectors of our societies. An institution of critique is not a new phenomenon. In fact, it has been a characteristic of the public institutions since its origins in the revolutionary republics of the young nation-states that began to form in Europe during the 18th century. What we saw there is what I believe we're experiencing right now, a streamlined depiction of the political subject, the recuperation of radical politics and social processes, and a general neutralization of the subversive gesture as it becomes catered for and represented by a centralized and state-sanctioned public arena. The government is simply using the progressive political institution as a surrogate, a hazy mirage that has been and will continue to be used to cover up broader socioeconomic issues.
There are no outsides. True. But there can be many insides, as you've said, Flea. When I consider fleeing against the backdrop of defending, I am confronted with what appears to be an unsurpassable dilemma that I think can be attributed to the ontological and epistemological deficiencies of the words that enumerate our roles, the role of this space, and the role of the readers and the viewers of the conversation we are currently involved in. There cannot be a theory of action, just as there cannot be a theory of a subject. It's actions that constitute subjects. It's actions that substantiate theories, and it's actions that transform an environment, a culture, and a gallery. We must not forget the transcendence in the very taking place of things. We must form a lexicon of affects, resonances, and voids, a language that can present a world as a processual set of occurrences rather than a discrete set of facts. I want our conversation to be an environment. I want our conversation to be more than a representation of experience. Of this gallery, your pale white skin, these benches, the script, and the words that you, the reader, are viewing. Equality is not given, it is taken. A public has no immanence, it is constructed. If we are to participate in culture, we must participate in the naming of the world we inhabit, for if we do not name, that is, assign meaning, and constitute the publics we participate within, meaning will be assigned. If we do not name, we will be named and live our lives under the words of others. New institutionalism for me is not a place, thing, or subject, nor does it predicate places, things, and subjects. New institutional exists in actions. It's a way, not a me, subject. It exists at the point of relations, and as Maria pointed out, at the end of the day, it is about self-determination. This gallery, those benches, your pale skin, and my black denim jeans find meaning in proximity to actions. Change will occur, a new institution will begin, and the political subject will form in the spaces, mediums, and times where the acts of representation become an act of reuse. become a performative translation that insinuates a yearning for the continuation of a narrative, a social bond, and a history.
Let's try to read this at the same time, shall we?
A
A substantial shift takes place in the character's relation to the script at this point. Flea is about to have
introduce a new
theoretical framework she has taken from a book by the contemporary philosopher Slavoj Zizek about Lacan and popular culture called Looking Awry. There will be points in which Flea plagiarizes. I hope you don't mind. The emergence of language opens up a hole in reality. And this hole shifts the vocations of our protruding gazes. Language is an artifice, a protuberance that molds the screen we see our worlds projected upon. When I consider this script, your words, these benches, the titles, press releases, and histories which elaborate their meaning in diverging ways, the spectators and readers who perceive our bodies and view the words in this space, and from this script, your desires and my gaze. I experience realms of fantasy. I see reality articulated as an index of a network of intersubjective relations. We have a drive for the new, defend. Like Sisyphus in the Odyssey, who pushes the boulder up the mountain only to have it roll down again. The aim of our affirmations is enveloped within a closed circuit. Sisyphus is, like you, me, and the hearers plus spectators of this script, are involved in a realm in which the goal of activity is the object of desire in itself. An object or destination in which the drive towards the thing becomes the thing in itself. There's no objective end to a drive, but only the fantasy that compels our desire and yearning for a reality we will never inhabit. Sisyphus's actions derived entirely from the fantasy of an end, but as we know, he will eternally ascend and descend the mountain. The object of desire is thus the action itself, not the reality of an objective conclusion. Reality is inherently a domain of fantasy. My desire is to confront these realms and to delimitate the symbolic orders that construe the social fabrics, which elaborate our relations to things. We cannot elude governance just as we cannot escape the realm of fantasy, but we can experience the voids, the spaces in which language and the semantic structures it articulates are lacerated and return to the promiscuous territories of the real. Whoa.
I have some inhibitions about your Lacanian positions on political action. I think it insinuates a certain level of removal from life, as though the political subject's role was to tiptoe around the parameters of a world rather than actually take part in one. We're in this gallery. We're in a script. We are a script. We are a script. Just as the viewers and participants in this space are implicated in their own narratives, scripts, and realms of fantasy. I want this script, our performance, and these benches to be constitutional. I seek a language which erects worlds, that bespeaks of truths, and has fidelity to the events in which they are brought into being. I'm sick of the ceaseless search for meanings. I want actions.
We're a script. Sure, we're no longer characters who have been positioned within conflicting sides of an argument concerning the public sphere. As subjects, we're narratives, scripts that are both screens that frame a world and actors that inhabit it. I'm not Flee, just as you're not Defend, for characters are facets of a narrative and we're a narrative. I am script A, and you are script B. Script A.
The way the paintings are installed, like anonymously cranked out products in a factory store, suggest a subversive, quasi-Marxist intent. But if he means to critique the marketing system, it is not at all clear. There seems to be a mindlessness about his work that makes you wonder, even if he knows what he is doing. Character 2. The only movement in the entire piece centers on a bunker-like office, where heart rate graphs pulse from the screams of beat-up monitors. 1. The fragmentation of the body persists as a metaphor for contemporary anxiety. This time the figures aren't plagued by dismemberment. They are broken, if upright, shells, whether they are a clutch of people listening to a stump speech or the founding fathers signing the Constitution. 2. The 74th Street location holds more of the same, with the exception of bad dimension. Their single pieces of painted steel propped against the wall look like leftovers from other sculptures. The works on paper show more thought and promise, scattering protoplasmic bubble across masks, spider webs, and bloodshot eyes. 1. Yes, there is a fast food obviousness to these paintings. Their references of contemporary precedents is too easily parsed. 2. Mr. Koons, whose heart was in his project, chose a better bunny, more compact, fewer seams, and made from it a truly weird work of art, taut, weightless, opaque, yet full of light. These ripsots look more melted than deflated and truly heavy. They lack visual life. 1. His three-dimensional work is generic, a familiar pastiche of known tics, gestures, and juxtapositions. 2. It implies counterintuitively that the anything-goes nature of art making today can be a kind of straitjacket. Script B.
Bob says to Lucy, "Hey Lucy, are you sure this place is going to be down with the whole rave thing we're doing tonight?" And Lucy responds, "Of course, Bob, that's exactly what the gallery wants us to do with these benches." Bob, "Yeah, but they're called discussion platforms, not rave platforms. It just seems like we might be transgressing the designated parameters of activity that have been sanctioned through the artist's usage of these specific words." Webster says, "A discussion is the action or process of talking about something, usually to reach a decision or exchange ideas." Bob, "And what is a platform, Webster?" Webster, "A raised level or surface in which people or things can stand." Bob, "Now that I think about it, a rave is an event in which ideas are exchanged and processes take place. And it certainly needs a platform after all. What would be the point of a rave without one?" Nancy, "Yeah, exactly. The space has a bad flow though. The benches really chop up the space. I think if we moved them to the perimeter of the room, the environment would be much more conducive for all the movements, exchanges, consumptions, and deductions that certainly are going to be taking place soon." Bob, "We are probably going to need to sell some stuff. Water, drugs, neon necklaces, glow-in-the-dark paint. Perhaps we could use the office area in the front of the gallery for stuff like that." Nancy, "Yeah, I'm sure they'd let us. After all, that is where the business is done." Bob, "The lights there. What are we going to do about those lights?" Nancy, "I know. We could have somebody stationed by the light switch and do a manual strobe thing." Bob, "That's perfect, in fact. That must be what these lights are for. They're like so bright and expensive looking." Nancy, "What about the colors of those benches? Like, what was this guy thinking? Are we living in the 1930s or something? The whole modernist Corbusier thing is such a vibe killer." Bob, "I really don't get it, Nancy. Like, I truly can never imagine what was going through this guy's head. I feel like I'm in a Ford car dealership in the 1950s or something. Like, I feel streamlined myself." Nancy, "Ha ha ha ha. I'm like definitely feeling a streamlined industrialist vibe. This artist just seems like such a man, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm going to come in here and not only try to control the ornaments I've made for the space, but also how the people participate in my little ego den." Bob, "It kind of feels like he doesn't even want us to participate in his little world. It's like self-contained or something. I get his concern for creating objects that take up this middle ground between works of art and utility objects, but he at least could have made them a little bit more approachable, perhaps some cushions, or maybe even a projector to watch movies on. The space seems really austere." Nancy, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. What do you think we could do to spruce it up a little bit?" Bob, "Well, plants are always good for that. Why don't you go out and buy some ferns, maybe some hanging vine type plants as well. It would be like brutalist modern architecture meets this new age guy and they adopt a child from Africa." Nancy, "Yeah, totally feeling it. That's what this guy needs, an interior designer. Leave it to the masculine sensibility of taste and this is exactly what happens. It's like he's representing sociality instead of facilitating it.